Okay, so we're now recording, and I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to our Napa Nights on connection and co-regulation. Tonight, we're going to dive into the power of connection and co-regulation, empowering you to build stronger and more resilient relationships with your child. In this session, we'll navigate the complexities of regulation and how our nervous systems interact to either hinder or facilitate meaningful social connection. We'll explore the psychological underpinnings of stress and connection, learning that no one achieves regulation alone. As we gain insights into our own nervous system states, we'll offer practical strategies and share tips and tricks to support more harmonious family dynamics through co-regulation. And that sounds amazing. Our speaker tonight is Maggie, who you can see on the screen. Give us a wave, Maggie. Maggie Rosenberg is, for those of you who are part of the Napa family, Maggie Rosenberg is one of our OTs at Napa Sydney. She's been there for approximately, or over 5 years now. She's actually an LA native who's called Australia home for 5 years. She received a bachelor's degree in psychology in 2010 and then spent 4 years teaching at primary school levels in Japan, all contributing to her lifelong passion and interest in child development. After that, she completed her master's and doctorates in clinical occupational therapy in California and has been at Napa pretty much since then. She brings her love of sensory integration and polyvagal, did I say that right, Maggie? Polyvagal informed practice to this work, having taken extensive coursework in both areas, and more recently has explored other interventions and interests such as craniosacral therapy, Reiki, and acuenergetics. So Maggie, as I mentioned, is currently an OT at Napa's Sydney clinic. And for those of you who are in Brisbane or tuning in from Queensland, she'll be making a cameo at our Brisbane clinic from, I think, July onwards for 3 or so intensives. So if you like what you see, you can see her up there for a short time. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to our speaker tonight. Thank you, Maggie. And as I mentioned, if you do have questions throughout the course of Maggie's presentations, just pop them into the chat function so you don't forget your message, your question, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can at the tail end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, everyone, for making time for this tonight. It's really exciting to me that everyone's here and interested in the content. This stuff kind of lights me up. I consider myself very much a learner in this space, and I get really excited by the dance of co-regulation, and the fact that every time I learn something new in the area, I realize how much more there is to learn. I think really this content is more than just about dealing with our littles, right? It's about kind of how we go about being human in the world among other humans. So it gets really exciting, and we'll just dive into it. Let me see if I can get to the next. Cool. So tonight, we're going to cover sort of how the brain and the body work together to process emotions and experiences. And then you'll be able to kind of apply these concepts to your life. And hopefully you'll learn strategies to help your family reduce stress and increase joy. Simple, right? Yeah, so this is going to be kind of an intro to the course. I think I heard once that after you attend any course or lecture, you'll pretty much retain 10%. So take from it what you can tonight, marinate on it. Obviously, I'm available for questions down the line. But just know that if you need more information, there's more out there, and I can kind of refer you to that. So let's dive in. Yeah. So I think this is just kind of an interesting thing to share off the bat. There have been studies about what predicts sort of positive outcomes from therapy for our kids. And sort of contrary to what we might think, 40% of the positive outcomes in therapy comes from the relationship, that therapeutic relationship. Another 30% comes from outside of therapy. 15% comes from hope and expectation, the belief that the child will achieve. And 15% comes from the actual therapeutic technique. So that means within this relationship, within, we have the power to kind of impact how well our kids do. And, we hold a lot of power to be the change makers, and that includes parents as well. Obviously includes parents. So one way that we can, that will kind of help us put everything in context is by doing a little dive into polyvagal theory. So this is Stephen Porges, and he came up with polyvagal theory in 1994 to provide a framework for the role of the nervous system in our physiological responses to stress, our emotional regulation, and ultimately our social behavior. So this is on the screen here. This is our kind of the old model for how we look at the nervous system. This was developed in the 1920s, and it's really just kind of a simplified model for how we as humans respond to acute stress. So what we're focusing in on is that the part on the right, the autonomic nervous system. These are the things that are happening kind of automatically below our conscious thought. So within that, we have two branches. There's the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight flight. And that's associated with increased heart rate and respiration, dilated pupils, so bigger pupils, increased blood flow to our skeletal muscles, and it's a mobilized state, which means we've got to be ready for action. The other branch is the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's what we call rest and digest. That's generally associated with decreased heart rate and respiration, constricted or smaller pupils, reduced blood flow to skeletal muscles, and instead the blood is diverted to kind of our internal organs, and that's what makes up the digest part. And this is an immobilized state, so that kind of calm. We don't need to be ready to jump into action or anything like that. So the problem with this model is once we started learning more about the effects of ongoing or repeated stressors, this framework didn't kind of capture the whole picture. So before we sort of understand polyvagal theory, we have to understand the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is cranial nerve 10. Vagus means the wanderer, so it's the wandering nerve, because this nerve goes from our brain to essentially every organ in our body. So polyvagal theory helps us understand that our reactions to stress aren't just about our minds, but it's deeply connected to our body's automatic systems. And knowing this can help us find ways to feel safer and more connected, especially in stressful situations. The vagus nerve's functions include regulation of heart rate, control of digestive functions, respiratory control, inhibiting inflammation, and innervation of facial expression and voice. It also innervates the middle ear through the stapedius muscle, which helps us detect differences in vocal tone and understand the emotion behind what someone is saying. So it's really important to remember that pathways between the body and the brain that travel over the vagus nerve are bidirectional. They go both ways. And 80% of the information travels from the body to the brain rather than the other way around. So we're really talking about these responses to stress as an actual body experience, which we'll get more into later. So this chart, which this will be kind of included in your resources later on, it explains the different modes. So what polyvagal theory does is it breaks up the parasympathetic branch. So this one here in blue, it breaks it up into two segments. So those two segments are comprised of the red and the green ones on your screen. So in general, there are 3 different modes that our body can shift into depending on how safe or stressed we feel. So down there in the green, the social engagement mode, this is when we feel safe and our body is in a kind of relaxed state. We're able to connect with others, to feel calm and think clearly. We're primed for learning in this state. This state is controlled by the ventral vagal pathway. So, it's the zone you're in when you're having a pleasant conversation with friends or enjoying a hobby. The next one up in yellow is the sympathetic nervous system activation. So that's kind of the fight flight. As stressors come in, we go into a bit of alert mode. In this mode, our heart rate increases. We get ready to either fight the danger or run away from it. And it's how you feel when you're startled by a loud noise or you need to meet a tight deadline, kind of thing. And then the dorsal vagal, or the freeze mode, is in the top. It's in the red. So this is when the danger is too overwhelming or there's no way to escape it, and our body might go into a shutdown. In this mode, we might feel numb or disconnected or unable to act or engage socially. And this is what happens when someone faints or feels completely helpless in a crisis. And it's key to note that shutting down is actually for our survival. And I think as we go through these modes, as we kind of describe them, you can get a sense of how that feels in your body, right? I think we've all experienced some degree of all of these states. And starting to recognize these states in yourself will actually make you better equipped to recognize them in your kids and then to manage them, to deal with them. Another kind of concept which I'll leave out of this presentation tonight, but I'll link to in the resources later on, is the window of tolerance. So this refers to our capacity to remain in social engagement in the face of stressors without getting overwhelmed or dissociating. And our goal is generally to widen that window of tolerance by promoting felt safety. So then there are 3 pillars of polyvagal theory. As you look at those words on your screen right now, I don't expect you to know what any of that means, but obviously we are about to go into it. So number 1 is the very specific organization of the nervous system states. So the ventral vagal, sympathetic, and dorsal vagal. And as you look at this polyvagal ladder, the older the system, the older the sort of brain system from an evolutionary perspective, the lower it is on the ladder. Okay, so the higher behavioral functions, kind of in that ventral vagal state, which are generally our more intentional behaviors, those are really dependent on the functioning of the more survival-focused foundational systems, which are embedded in the brainstem and lower down and in the limbic system as well. So the sympathetic and dorsal vagal structures of the brain need to be perceiving safety for the higher levels to actually be working. And yeah, the higher levels actually just shut down. We don't have access to them when our system is perceiving threat. It's also worth noting that the higher we go on this ladder, the richer our range of emotional and social expression gets, right? So a helpful way to kind of understand that hierarchy is through this model of the 3-parted brain, also called the triune brain. And yeah, it just shows that when the higher brain regions are not able to be accessed, either due to stress or because, in the case of kids, maybe they haven't developed yet, like the prefrontal cortex and all of that, then we revert back to evolutionarily earlier brain regions. So, the flip side of that coin is that the newer brain circuits can inhibit or turn off the older circuits. So, if you suddenly hear a loud noise in your house and you're home alone, our reason will then, we'll get that fright, and then our reason will kick in and we'll be able to reassure the lower parts of the brain, oh, that was just, a car outside or something like that, right? So here on the left, we have in red the lizard brain. So that's comprised of the brainstem and the cerebellum. This is really the, what can kick us into either that fight, flight, or shut down, right? The lizard brain says, am I safe? The next one, the mammalian brain, says, am I loved? That's where our limbic system is. And then the neocortex says, what can I learn from this? And so individuals who are operating in that lizard brain, right, perceiving a lot of threat, and they're really going into that kind of shutdown, they can process a maximum of 6 words. And in times of stress, we're generally less creative, less generous, less compassionate. Those really intentional social behaviors, we just don't have access to them. Dr. Dan Siegel is a psychiatrist who has some really great resources about understanding the mind-body connection, and the brain's role in interpersonal relationships. And there will be some additional links that we send out later on. He has really good information about, the connection between these parts of the brain. He makes it easily understandable for adults, and he also has a really good video for kids, to help them understand why they might kind of, what we call, flip the lid. So the next part of polyvagal theory is neuroception. So this is often referred to as a detection without awareness. It's the felt sense. It's what contributes to our sense of felt safety. It's it's why, when we're walking down a dark alley at night, the hair on the back of our neck might stick up, right? It's why when a highly stressed person enters the room, suddenly you feel more stressed and on alert without even a word being spoken. If you look at this picture on the slide, even though half of her face is covered, we know this is a genuine smile. We can see the softness in her expression. We can see the crinkles at the corner of her eyes. We feel that sense of safety even from behind her mask. And at the brainstem level, we're constantly scanning the environment for signs of danger, safety, life threat. This is all happening below our conscious awareness. And things that are associated with threat and danger form especially strong neural pathways really quickly, because it's for our survival. It's why you won't touch the hot stove twice. When we think of our kids that have, challenging behaviors, they might actually have faulty neuroception. So trauma, which we'll get more into, trauma makes you develop a neuroception of activation or shutdown. So when we constantly perceive threat in our environment, we're less able to recognize cues of safety, and fight flight kind of becomes the normal. We tend to misread social cues. So we're actually more likely to perceive neutral faces as aggressive and see fearful faces as if they were angry. And we're also not able to use other people to co-regulate. And then once a trauma response has occurred, the vagus nerve operating through the brainstem might embed a trauma response automatically into the body. And this can actually happen in milliseconds. It takes about one instance of threat to be hardwired into the system, and it takes about 500 positive experiences to override that negative experience. Our brains are hardwired to be biased for negativity because our survival depends on it. And because of that, regulation challenges, they won't just be fixed with a quick approach, because you have to reroute the neural pathways. But the key point is that it's possible with kind of repeated experience, with repeated regulation into a sense of safety. So I think patience with ourselves as the co-regulators is really key. So we'll dive in a little bit to the brain and how it works during stress. Okay, so the amygdala is the judge of the brain. It receives sensory information from the brainstem, and if it detects danger, it injects adrenaline and then triggers the fight-flight response. With chronic stress, the amygdala is biased to see danger. The amygdala is also home of implicit memory or unconscious memory, which is based on past experience. So that's what can make us really reactive to certain situations, because we're still at the level of below conscious thought. Those reactions are really coming from the body and not from the thinking brain. Interestingly, studies have shown that when they've looked at the amygdala of there's similar enlargement and activity level. So same level of firing in the amygdala of veterans with PTSD post-war as compared to autistic individuals. So that's kind of the level of alert we're talking about here. Often novelty or newness is perceived as threat for our kids. And, you know, knowing that all this is going on in their brains and in their bodies, it's, you know, how hard our kids are working to stay regulated, to go back to that balance, right? Because we're all seeking balance. Our nervous system seeks balance. You know, I like to say to myself, you know, they're not giving me a hard time, they're having a hard time. That can just help kind of just reinforce that patience. There's this old piece of folk wisdom that goes, the same boiling water that softens the potato hardens the egg. And basically what I take this to mean is, you know, each person has a unique capacity to take in and integrate and manage and react to sensory input from the environment and from others and from, you know, his or her own body. Another way to say this is there are as many responses to trauma as there are nervous systems in the world. Trauma is not an event. It's the body's response to an event that is perceived as dangerous. Sorry, notifications coming up. Trauma is, you know, the body's protective response to threat received. So really, trauma is in the eye of the perceiver. We can think about traumatic stress. You know, I think a lot of us get nervous talking about trauma because we think it's, you know, this really intense thing. But, you know, traumatic stress is really just too much, too fast, too loud. And because of that, the intervention is often low and slow and connected. Developmental trauma, this is kind of like the big T trauma, which includes abuse, neglect, and interestingly, early medical trauma, looks the same in the neurobiology as neurodiversity in terms of that activation level. And so, you know, it's when we ourselves or others are having reactions that don't seem to make sense from the outside, or maybe don't seem appropriate to what the, you know, stimulus was, you know, we need to get curious, not furious, as to why that might be. So the last pillar of polyvagal theory, which is really key, is co-regulation. And I know this is like a really hot buzzword. We kind of throw it around all the time, but even as a therapist, sometimes I find it hard to define, right? Or there isn't a whole lot of consensus about what it means. So does anyone want to take a stab at trying to define it or sharing what you might know about co-regulation? We can open it up if anyone wants to turn on their mics. Paul?
Hi there, everyone. Does anyone have, you can just turn your own mic on if you want to have a go at answering Maggie's question. I don't know if we have any volunteers, Maggie.
That's okay. I wouldn't want to be put on the spot on a random.
Oh, here we go.
writing.
Hang on,
Oh,
we have
here
someone.
we go.
Yeah, hi, Maggie.
Hi.
My name's Samantha. I think it's when your own regulation of your emotions and then how you behave and react in a situation can be co-regulated with other people. So they kind of feed off your emotional regulation.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I like how you highlight that sort of that flow, that bidirectional flow of regulation. Yeah, that's kind of what we're getting at here. Thank you for being brave. I won't put anyone else on the spot tonight. But I kind of like this way of framing it. So I think of co-regulation as a continual presence of connectedness that fosters the best in both the child and the adult. Steve Porges says, we are nourished by social interaction And so caregiving isn't the best term because we are actually being nourished by giving care. And it's important to remember that we're not really trying to change anything about the situation, right? The place you're regulating a child into isn't another polyvagal state. It's into a space of safety, no matter what state they're in. And really importantly, distraction can be really useful in the moment, and definitely sometimes we need it, and kind of on with it. Let's distract away, but thinking more long term, when we distract kids away from their uncomfortable feelings, those molecules of emotion and stress that remain in the body, even for a lifetime. So the idea is that we have to let kids get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that's how they'll learn the resilience to know that there's safety on the other side of the dysregulation, right? And then another point that I think is really important is that calm is overrated, right? So if you remember the two states on that bell curve chart, the green one on the bottom and the red one on top. So ventral vagal and dorsal vagal states are both branches of the parasympathetic nervous system, which has traditionally been seen as the calmer state, right? So you can see why that's problematic. And that when we're talking about co-regulation, it's not the calm we're after, because what looks like calm could be a person who is adaptable and flexible, capable of learning, socially engaged. But calm could also be shut down, functional freeze, numbing of sensation and social experience. So, the opposite of dysregulation is not calm, it's adaptability. Do we ultimately want the child to be calm, or do we want them to have access to freedom, joy, expansion, and growth? All right, so if you'll all just indulge me for a minute, we'll dive a little deeper into the neuroscience. So here we're looking at the brain from behind. So we've got the left hemisphere, the right hemisphere, and below we have the cerebellum, and then just in front of the cerebellum is the brainstem. So that left hemisphere of the brain houses judgment. So that's, am I okay? Are you part of my tribe or not? The right brain says, I wonder, and holds capacity for curiosity about other people's behaviors. And then all sensations from inside and outside the body are processed through the brainstem and then the amygdala as, either safe or as either, irrelevant or threat. Dysregulation can come from any of these pathways in, and regulation can come from any direction as well. But cognition is the fastest path to dysregulation and the slowest path to restoration. The left brain can soothe the right brain, that using that reason to kind of override, right? So the left brain can soothe the right brain, but it does not have pathways down to regulate the amygdala. Whereas the right brain is nonverbal and does have those pathways down to regulate the amygdala. So a key part of co-regulation is attunement, which refers to that process of becoming responsive, receptive, or sensitive to a person or an interaction, which often in a deep and intuitive manner that involves empathetic understanding and that emotional resonance. And this is really key because, as it says here on the slide, children need attunement to feel secure and to develop well. And throughout our lives, we need attunement to feel close and connected. There's a longitudinal study out of Harvard, which began in 1938, and I believe it's still running. So it's covered this cohort of, at the time, young men, and now they're not so young. But it was a study on human development and well-being, and what they're finding is relationships are the #1 predictor of happiness. So we'll talk about some of the ways that we kind of foster that relationship It starts really early, right? It starts with this process of gleaming and beaming. So that spark of joy, that twinkle in the eye, which is especially powerful when it's shared between the caregiver and the child, because it helps the child begin to understand the sensations associated with emotion. And then they start to develop a sense of self. Um, safety may be relative, but love is not. Um, Love makes us feel that we're okay, even when we're not okay. And oxytocin, which is that neurotransmitter of bonding and connection and love, right? Oxytocin is the only neurochemical that lowers cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So this is really, I talked about being kind of a lifelong learner in this space. Even though I've been an OT for 8 years, I've only recently learned about this agile model of co-regulation, and I just think it's brilliant. So before we go into the parts of this, I want to note that over 90% of communication is nonverbal. When we look at the way that meaning is communicated, only 7% is through spoken word. Another 38% comes through voice tone, and 55% is through body language. And so this model really helps us kind of break that down, right? Of what really is that nonverbal communication. So affect is, that emotional emotional expression, right? And this is what the child experiences first and most. Your demeanor and overall emotional state are kind of what gets conveyed to the child. So, does your emotional expression match the needs of the individual you're with? Maybe you need to, tamp it down a bit or dial it up if you really need to get someone's attention. Maybe you need to be really quietly loud. There's a lot conveyed in the way you move your eyes and your gestures, which we'll get to. Without having to really raise your voice. You get how excited I am to communicate this with you. So with gesture, it's we want to be really attuned in our facial expressions and our hands, the pacing of our movement, our posture, and how we manage that interpersonal space. So with intonation, there's different, we all know there's different social emotional meaning depending on the tone of voice you use. I could say, I'm really happy you all joined tonight. Or I could say, oh, I'm really happy you all joined tonight. And you get a totally different feeling, even though the words are the same. So the brain prioritizes intonation over meaning, which means kids will hear how you feel about them and not necessarily the content of what you're saying. Generally, calm, slower voices convey safety and regulation. And recently I've heard one of my course instructors say, think about the way you might speak to a baby animal. Some people might not have that same instinct with kids, but everyone kind of talks to a baby puppy the same way, right? So that kind of like really playing up that intonation, you can kind of have fun with it. Latency has to do with the pacing of the interaction. So, we want to wait and allow the child to take you in. We can call that kind of that dance we do, that wait, watch, wait, and wonder. So you kind of allow that kid time to come to you and time to initiate the engagement, right? We don't always have to be the one jumping in and initiating. And remember, there's power in the pause, right? We think about different processing speeds and things like that, and a pause that might make us as the adult start to feel really uncomfortable might just be the right amount of pausing that our kid needs. And then engagement, we talk a lot about engagement, but what does that look like? What does that look like from one individual to the next? We want to make sure there's that sense of I get you, you get me, before we continue on to the next thing. And then, one thing to remember is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? So we should be listening twice as much as we speak. Cool. So some of the tips that I take from my toolbox. So there's this concept called rhythmic entrainment. So the way it works is that weaker rhythms will naturally sync up to stronger rhythms. So if we think about breath, for example, if you're just in the general vicinity of your child and you just start modeling regular deep breaths, you don't even need words. Like you don't need to say, take a breath. The child's breath pattern will just start to match yours naturally. With rhythmicity and music, words are processed through that left brain, that cognitive brain, whereas music is processed through the right brain. So turning things into a kind of sing-song, we can narrate what's going to happen next and what's going to happen after that just through like simple tunes. And you might find that kids will follow instructions better when it's sung because of that difference between where those things are processed. 60 beats per minute is the average resting heart rate. So it provides a really calming, soothing tempo. So that's, essentially like 1 beat per second. I do that with, hand claps or songs or sometimes just tapping, tapping on the kid's shoulder or their leg or their back, wherever. And then you can actually look for 60 beats per minute playlists on Spotify. They have some really good options. So, if this doesn't feel kind of natural to you, you can just go look for some music. Proximity. So that's just kind of the closeness. If your own internal rhythms are regulated, simply being near your child and sometimes, even making a little bit of physical contact, that can help your child's body return to a more regulated level. Remember this regulation dance, a lot of it's happening at the body level. Something like deep pressure touch, so that includes, bear hugs, squeezes on arms and legs, compression under couch cushions, things like that. Deep pressure decreases cortisol and increases serotonin. It also releases GABA, which is the only neurotransmitter that allows us to calm enough to be present in our body. And then inner smile is actually a meditation, simple one, so don't get intimidated, where if you kind of practice it a little bit on your own, you can use it while you're with your child, and it'll just help them kind of help the two of you come into resonance there. So for the inner smile, you kind of close your eyes and you think about a person who makes you happy no matter what. So generally this probably won't be your kids. So think about someone else. It could be a pet. It could be like tacos, right? It could be anything that just makes you happy no matter what. And then as you have that image in your head, you feel that smile through your whole body. So just feel what it feels like for that whole body smile. And then you drop the mental picture and you continue to feel that sensation in your body. And you hold on to that feeling as long as you can. That might be 5 seconds, it might be 10 seconds. And when you lose the feeling, you bring up the image again and feel that smile wash over your whole body again and try to hold on to it. The more you practice, the quicker you can drop into it and the less you need the mental picture and the longer you hold on to the feeling. And then once you're in that kind of whole body smile state, that's the feeling that your child will neurocept or just pick up on, right? If this all feels kind of hard or, new or just tricky, then, I would recommend kind of what I call like mental vacation mode. So, when you're just at your absolute wit's end and nothing seems to be working, you just say, I'm on a beach. I'm on a beach, the warm sun, I can feel it on my skin, my toes are in the water. Maybe I have a pina colada in my hand, but like nobody's bothering me. I feel great. And then you turn to your little one and you say, okay, we're going to put on shoes now. And, they'll hear that really happy feeling that you're feeling in your body, right? And they don't have to know that it's not directed at them and that you're actually mentally on vacation. Um, so the next part, a lot of times we think about, like, we get really like focused on like what sensory tool, what sensory strategy can I give this kid to help them calm down? But, remember that social interactions are inherently sensory. The visual input, the sound, the body sense that emotion carries, right? Um, so you're not only your child's best toy, but you also have the power to be your child's best regulation tool. And I'll kind of show you what I mean, hoping this video link works. Okay, so in this interaction, it's not the information being conveyed, right? Because clearly neither one understands what the other one's saying. Um, it's about the affect, that emotional experience. It's about the response. It's about the shared joy and just experiencing the world together. Um, the dad there, he doesn't just keep initiating, throwing things at the kid. He pauses. He lets the kid initiate and come to him. Um, the child feels powerful as a communicator, knowing, I can make an impact on you, not just the other way around. We kind of share the power in that social dynamic there. And just remembering that kids hear how you feel about them, not what you say. And then, it goes without saying that nobody's going to get this right 100% of the time. That's just impossible. I think that, I would think that a lot of people before having kids didn't realize having kids means like another body, another person is like up in your business at all times, no matter what. And that's, that can be a sensory overload for the best of us, right? Um, so just remember, there's no such thing as there's only two types of relationship, right? There's relationship with rupture with repair, and relationship with rupture without repair. So, we're bound to miss those cues for attunement, especially when our own body batteries are running low. If you're tired, if you're hungry, if you are stressed at work, that's so understandable. But what matters is kind of what you do to repair the dynamic, right? And then just remember that the best tool we have for supporting someone's regulation is validating their experience. We don't necessarily have to fix it. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the fun stuff. I think you all kind of know what this picture is getting at. So before you roll your eyes, I just want to know if anyone wants to kind of turn on their mic and share what is the most obnoxious advice you've ever received along the lines of put your own oxygen mask on first. Anyone have a good one? You can put them in the chat as well if you'd like. And if no one can think of one off the top of your head, I know that, this is probably a common experience for a lot of you. It's just a really annoying piece of advice. And I'm just being conscious of the time, so we'll just keep it rolling. But it is actually critical for your health to look after yourself. Stress eventually will take a toll, whether it's tomorrow or 20 years down the line, right? If you don't take a break, your body will eventually take it for you. But also because of what we know about neuroception, a dysregulated adult will never regulate a dysregulated child. And even when we try to act calm, but we're dysregulated, our bodies will say otherwise, and the kids will understand that because of neuroception. So in this instance, authenticity is really key. Oh, Marianne, that's a good one. Make dinner for yourself when you're making something for him. Fantastic. Yep. One thing I heard recently is this idea of carving out time for yourself, like the mental imagery of like taking a knife and like carving out the time, because you actually can't invent more time. So you have to be really like aggressive, like this 5 minutes is mine. And then, self-care isn't selfish, right? So we think about like, what are the ways we actually do look after ourselves? Manicures and massages might feel great, but I don't think that's really true self-care because, well, it feels good at the time. You're not actually developing the skills to more adaptively cope with life stressors and foster that sense of self-worth, right? So some of the things that I think of as self-cares, reparenting yourself, radical acceptance, learning to set boundaries and voice your needs, um, random acts of kindness in service of others, and community building. Taking time out to have a little dance party in the kitchen, or do anything that really fills your cup. Um, Kids learn from modeling, and so do you want them to learn that they should shut down their inner voice, ignore their needs, only act in the interest of others? We don't want them to be running themselves into the ground as adults themselves, right? And then, the strongest regulator in the room sets the tone for the whole room. So you actually need to feel regulated to support your child's ability to co-regulate. Chocolate, fantastic. Chocolate is great self-care, and nobody can disagree with me on that. Um, you know, kids learn self-regulation from a really strong foundation in co-regulation, and co-regulation really comes from a strong relationship with yourself. So some of the specific strategies we'll get into here. We are nearing the end, so yeah, we'll wrap up pretty soon. So RAIN is a practice of radical compassion developed by Tara Brach, and there will be more information in the resources. But so the first step is to recognize what's happening within yourself. And this involves acknowledging your thoughts and feelings and sensations without judgment. So it's about becoming aware of your inner experience in the present moment. And then once you've recognized what's happening, the next step is to allow those experiences and emotions to be as they are without trying to change or suppress them. This step involves letting go of the resistance and accepting things just as they are. In the next step, you investigate your inner experience with curiosity and compassion. You explore the thoughts, feelings, and sensations you've recognized and seek to understand them more deeply. This can involve questions like, what is this feeling trying to tell me? Or what do I need in this moment? And then the final step is to nurture yourself with compassion and kindness. So this involves offering yourself the care and support you need in the face of difficult experiences. And it's about treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer to a friend in need. So a lot of the times we show a lot more compassion to other people than we do to ourselves, right? But so for a lot of us, it can actually be hard to even figure out what our needs are because even outside of the parenting world, we're kind of not socialized to really, assert our needs and all of that. So Heather Morgan has found a way to help us identify our needs and values through this values-based integration process. And you can take your time on this, do it, later on. I'm still working on mine. So you start off, you identify 5 times in your life, no matter what age you were, what stage in life, that you felt the most alive. So the most like yourself. Oh, I love these questions that are coming in. I'm getting really excited. So when you think about those 5 times in your life where you felt the most alive, what was it about those experiences that made it feel like that? So was it a gathering of loved ones? Were you in nature? Were you experiencing something new? Things like that. And then in those qualities of the experience that made you feel alive, what values do they reflect? And how can you incorporate those values into your everyday life? And then, as you go about your life, your day-to-day life, and you might start to feel your stress levels rising, thinking about, am I living in a way that's aligned with those values? And if not, am I able to get things back on track? If this concept, if identifying the values is hard, I'm going to link to an activity that from Brene Brown called Living Into Our Values. And one of the pages in that activity that's on her website has sort of like a word bank of values. So it can kind of get the creative juices flowing for you. And then, so last couple bits here, if you'll hang with me for another 5 minutes or so. So shaking is seen in humans and certain animals as a response to an intense stressor. Like you think about when a zebra shakes after being chased by a lion. And when this process of neurogenic tremor is triggered by stress, the shaking actually helps to discharge the excess energy and tension that's stored in the muscles and the nervous system. And this release can bring a sense of relief and relaxation by activating the parasympathetic nervous system or the vagus nerve. So we're going to do our own neurogenic tremor, and I'm going to encourage you all to turn up the volume, get out of your chairs, and just have a boogie. Shake it out. You don't need to dance per se, but just shake, get your body moving. All right, let's bring it back. I'm suddenly very aware that I'm the only one who has their camera on. Cool. And then, so the last bit is, I don't want to add like homework for you guys. I don't want to add anything to your plate, but I do want to challenge you all to look for the glimmers in your day-to-day lives. Glimmers are those experiences or interactions that feel like safety, feel like expansion, connection, joy, right? We can start to shift our nervous systems to see the positive rather than kind of focusing on our triggers. And it can be helpful to write down one glimmer at the end of the day. It can be related to a parenting win, or a moment of shared joy with your child, or just something that made you smile. Try it out and you might see your focus start to shift over time, right? And that's it. We'll leave it there for tonight, and I'm happy to take questions if anyone wants to stick around.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you, Maggie. I felt like I was back at university there for a little while. Certainly different to the Maggie that we see in the doors at Napa Centre, who sings. And well, actually, the dancing was very similar to the Maggie that we see in the doors there. And thank you for letting loose on the dance floor there, Maggie. That was amazing to see. We should have made everyone put their cameras on for that section. But anyway, missed opportunity there. Big thank you to Maggie for putting that presentation together, guys. This is your opportunity to submit your questions in the chat function. We do have a couple in here, which I'm going to fire off at Maggie if she's got her breath back. Is that all right, Maggie? Feeling prepared for that? There's a couple of interesting ones that have come through. A couple of interesting ones that have come through. But as Maggie said, if there's anything that we don't get to, or if you don't feel comfortable about asking your question in the group environment here, Maggie has kindly put her email address on the screen there. So just jot that down, or it will be in the email that I send you out tomorrow. So you can just send her a message directly if you have a more specific question you want to ask about yourself, your situation, or your child. So just going to go through some of the things that have come through on the chat, Maggie, and I'm going to fire them off at you, and we'll do our best to try and get to them. Vicky just made a comment that there were really, really interesting points there, Maggie, in regards to the PTSD and autism. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to try and get this word right here, but I think it's Ange, maybe Angela, has said if autistic children have the same, is it amygdala?
Amygdala, yeah.
Amygdala activity as veterans with PTSD, can this be somewhat calmed? Does therapeutic listening help?
Yeah, so it can definitely be calmed, and that works through neuroplasticity. So, we develop these strong neural pathways when it comes to danger because that's, our lives kind of depend on it, right? But repeated exposure to safety can actually change that and can just settle things down, right? So, we do think about certain strategies, environmental modifications, all of that. But yeah, just really focusing on the ways that we convey safety. And then with the therapeutic listening, there are definitely some programs out there. Therapeutic listening itself, from Vital Links, does have some tracks that do speak to safety. Some of the modulated music would be really good for that. There's one specifically called Baroque for Modulation, which is really nice. And then there is another program that comes from the polyvagal folks, which is called the Safe and Sound Protocol. And that has had really good results on just settling the nervous system. There's actually been therapists I've known that, when they're stressed, they'll put on the headphones, and the kid will kind of turn around and settle because the adult system has settled, and that's felt in the shared space.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. All right. A couple of comments on some of the things you were talking about earlier. Here's a question from Salima. Do you have any experience with kids taking, is it GABA supplements or GABA supplements?
I personally don't, but I do know that it exists, and I've heard that it can be really beneficial. You can get a workup done by a functional medicine doctor who can kind of test GABA levels. What happens for kids because there are people who don't kind of produce enough GABA in their body to have that real calm presence. And so what you get for the kids that don't have enough GABA is they end up kind of drowning in dopamine. So dopamine is that like happy neurotransmitter. It's the reward center. And so kids will kind of seek those quick rewards, right? And sometimes that can be indicative of somebody who's low on GABA. And in that case, I would probably seek out a functional medicine provider who can do a workup and then prescribe supplements if that's appropriate.
Great. This is an interesting one. Do you have an experience with kids with telepathic skills?
Ooh, I love that question. Oh, yes. I don't know where to begin with that one. I think so many of our kids are intuitive, especially our non-speaking friends, because they rely so much on the nonverbals, and so they don't have the kind of noise of that chatter that a lot of us do. We had, in our clinic sort of years ago, we had kind of a sad incident happen, and a lot of us were kind of reeling from it. And I remember one of our kiddos, I thought I was fine. I had kind of dried my eyes, and then the minute I entered the mat, like the minute I stepped onto the mat, she had been fine. She started crying. And I think that's just because she felt what I was feeling. I don't know if that quite gets to the question. I don't know if there's more to that question, but yeah, definitely possible.
All right, maybe Christy, if you're still online, if you have a second part to that question, we can continue that in a second. I think that's the majority of the things that have come through. A bit of love coming through for your dancing skills here as well. Yvette mentioned that that was the best talk about co-regulation she's ever heard. It made so much sense, so a big thank you for that. She feels she now has a foundation to work on. Marianne has said, thanks for sharing your experience and knowledge. And the question is, when you're in a therapy session and you sense a lack of trust from a parent and significant dysregulation and a flight mode from the child, what do you say to yourself in your mind to regulate yourself? P.S. I trust you.
So there's a practice that I like to do when I know I'm entering kind of a tricky dynamic or tricky situation. It's called a grounding fill. And I kind of imagine that the soles of my feet are my lungs, and I'm breathing in pure energy from the earth's core. And it's a series of 5 breaths where you sequentially fill higher and higher in your body, until you kind of breathe in. You fill, first breath, you fill to your knees, second breath to your hips, third breath to your shoulders, fourth breath in, you breathe the earth's energy to your fingertips. And on that last fifth breath in, you breathe in all the way up through the top of your head, where it kind of showers down around you. And so to answer part of your question, I think that helps me kind of stay centered and grounded in myself. And then the other aspect of that is, I know that I'm never working purely with a child. You're always working within family dynamics. So, you know, I know that I have to not only meet the child where they are, but meet the whole family where they are. And, as we've talked about tonight, co-regulation is not just about the child, it's all of us. We are constantly all co-regulating off of each other. And that lack of trust and that flight mode, the dysregulation you're speaking about, I mean, it's so common. And I think we need to kind of be able to separate the inner critic that puts judgment on that, because we all get to that point, and it's so okay.
Okay, great. All right, guys, this is your last opportunity to send something through. Whilst I give Maggie just one quick break from talking, I'm just going to remind you about our next 2 Napa nights that are coming up. Our next one is on Tuesday, the 18th of June at 7 o'clock. It's on nutritional tips for kids with complex needs. So leaning into one of the other experts that works out of our Sydney Napa clinic, dietitian Dr. Fiona Arrowsmith, and she's going to talk about everything that the pediatric dietitians do and how they can assist your child with issues in feeding, diet, and nutrition. So some great tips on that stuff. So that one's coming up. And then the one scheduled after that is in September, is a celebration of special, and it's to celebrate the 5-year anniversary of the release of the book, which is called Special: Antidotes to the Obsessions That Come with a Child's Disability, which many of you I know have read. It's written by author Melanie Dimmitt, and she's going to join us on that evening and talk us through that book, talk us through the wonderful journey she had writing that book, and also all the exciting adventures she's been on in the 5 years since the release of that groundbreaking book. And we're also going to catch up with some of the people that she originally interviewed for that book, to see how they're going 5 years later, further on into their disability journey. So that's going to be a really, really special one. So that's on 17th of September. All right, I have part 2B of that question, Maggie, if I could just fire that off to you, and then I think we can let everyone go off and have dinner or go to bed or whatever have you. So it's from Christy. So the second part of the question about telepathic kid. So do you have any advice for parents with a telepathic kid? The kid is ASD level 3, non-verbal, apraxia, DCD, profound intellectual disability. So I guess Christy's looking for a little bit of advice on how to, I guess, deal or cope with their child.
I would love to meet your kid. They sound really cool. I don't know that I can give you a specific advice. I think there's a lot of power in different bodywork modalities. So things like craniosacral therapy, things like Feldenkrais, things like, things that kind of tap into that body connection. Your kid sounds like a superstar, and I'm happy to. I think we can probably dive deeper into that, separately. So shoot me an email. We can chat some more.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right, that's a great one. So, Christy, we might get you to just jot down, or you'll get the email tomorrow, but you can see Maggie's email on the screen there. Maggie's happy to connect with you directly to have a bit further chat on your child. All right, guys. Well, a big thank you to everyone who has tuned in tonight. I know it's always hard, particularly when it starts to get cold and then there's lots going on at nighttime with bedtimes and dinners and things like that. But I want to say a big thank you to Maggie, who's kind of gone a bit over and above in terms of obviously developing this presentation. And, it's obviously a very, very special area of interest for her. You can access this superstar, as I said, through Napa Sydney, and she will be having a short stint up in our Napa Brisbane clinic for 3 intensives come July onwards. So yes. So thank you very much for tuning in tonight, and thank you for tuning into our Napa Nights. You will receive an email tomorrow with the presentation, the link to this recording, because I know I'll probably be watching it back because a lot of that stuff will have got over our head, and maybe if I watch it the second time, I'll be able to process the 20%, then the 30%, and the 40%. Right, Maggie?
It's amygdala, Paul.
But I'll send that email out in the coming days, and that will also Maggie's also put together a really great resource full of all sorts of additional links and stuff that you can go and access further information, and I'll be including that in the email as well. So big thank you for everyone for tuning in. Big thank you to Maggie, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.